did you see him do anything differently to the body of George Floyd?
Can you
Well, I'll just ask you the question. Yes. In response to what the crowd was doing or saying, did you see him at any time kneel in harder on George Floyd in response?
Yes.
Incidentally, do you see Mr. Chauvin in the courtroom
Yes.
today? Could you please point him out?
There.
Yep, for the record, she's pointed to Mr. Chauvin. Thank you. Now, you had at some point told us that you were there when the ambulance came.
Yes.
Did Mr. Chauvin get off of Mr. Floyd when the ambulance arrived?
No, the ambulance person had to actually tell him to lift up.
So the ambulance arrives, and does an ambulance person get out right away and come over to ask Mr. Chauvin to lift up, or did something else happen before that?
He checked his pulse first while Chauvin's knee was still remained on George Floyd's neck.
All right, so paramedic checks his pulse with Mr. Chauvin still on his neck. Then what happened after that?
The paramedic he did like a motion, like get up, basically telling him to remove his knee. His knee was still there, even when they came, even at the end, even unresponsive.
Right. And did Mr. Chauvin get up at that time then?
Yes.
Right. As you were observing the entire scene, did you observe Mr. Floyd do anything that you felt was threatening to any of the police officers?
No.
Did you see him do anything other than call out in anguish?
No, besides maybe trying to get more comfortable. No.
Do you feel, well, let me ask the question a different way. When you arrived at the scene, you heard Mr. Floyd crying out, you told us.
Yes, from afar.
At some point during the period of time when he was under Mr. Chauvin's knees, did you see him go unconscious?
Yes.
Did you hear any discussion about whether or not he had in fact died?
No.
Did you have, well, when the paramedics came, they picked up his body, they took his body from the scene?
Yes.
Did they revive him there?
No.
Did you ever see him conscious again when he left the scene, before he left the scene?
No.
Incidentally, with the photograph here of the bystanders, the exhibit 184 that's in front of you, did the bystanders for the most part stay there on the sidewalk where they were?
For the most part, yes.
If they stepped at all into the street, was there an officer there telling them to get back?
Yes.
Did you see that the bystanders complied with what the officer was asking to get back?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll pass it.
Mr. Mills.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for being here. Just have a few questions for you, okay?
Okay.
You testified that when you first came up to Cup Foods, you initially heard what was being said by Mr. Floyd, right?
Yes.
And you sent your cousin into the store, and you never went into Cup Foods yourself, right?
Correct.
You turned around, and you pretty much right away from the time you sent your cousin into the store, right away started recording, right?
Correct.
And ultimately, you recorded from that point all the way until shortly after the paramedics came and left, right?
Correct.
All right. And so it's fair to say that prior to, well, as you approached them, Mr. Floyd was already in that position, right?
Yes.
He was on the ground.
Yes.
And anything that happened prior to that, you wouldn't be privy to or know what happened, right?
Correct.
But you, and so what we saw from your video that has been played was roughly 10 minutes of time, agreed?
Agree.
And throughout the course of your time that you were recording, you would agree that when we watch the video, there are times we can hear your voice, right?
Correct.
And we can hear the voices of the other people, the bystanders, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And I believe that you said there were about 12, by the end, there were about 12 to 14 people that were standing kind of right there on the sidewalk, right?
Correct.
Were you also observing people across the street?
No.
Were you observing people like down on the other side of 38th?
No. Mainly focused on what I was seeing.
Right. You would agree that that intersection is a fairly busy intersection, lots of traffic?
Certain days, yes, it could be.
Yeah, I mean at times, right?
Yes.
It's a bus route, there's buses coming by.
It's
right?
been multiple times. It's been empty though, as well. But yeah.
Understood, right. It's a busier intersection. It's in the middle of the city, right? It's compared to like in a neighborhood, like where there's all houses. More traffic there, right?
Yes.
And in fact, in your video, we can actually see a lot of cars driving by because this was, a nice spring night, right?
Yes.
And so, your video, in other words, sort of speaks for itself, right? What we see on it is what you were watching as you watched it.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. You were interviewed by, I believe, a couple of Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents early on in the case, right?
Who?
The BCA, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. They came and took a statement from you.
Yes.
Okay.
The FBI?
Was there an FBI agent? Let's call them law enforcement. All right. There were a couple of law enforcement agents that interviewed you.
Closer to the situation, yes. It was I believe two white guys. I'm not sure if they were white, but they looked white. But yes, closer to the situation, yes.
Right. You met with them. You provided them your cell phone, and you
Yes.
allowed them to copy the video from your cell phone for purposes of their investigation, right?
Yes.
And at that time, they took a statement from you. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And you understand that that statement was recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I don't want to misphrase what you said before, but I thought I heard you say that you were aware that there were 4 officers on the scene when you walked up.
No. I didn't see the other officers until the end, and when everything blowed up, I've seen different angles. That's when I figured out it was two other officers on George Floyd when he was laying on the ground.
The question being, though, however, as you were filming it, you were not aware that those other 2 officers were there.
No, only officer I seen was Chauvin and Officer Tao.
Right. And those are the 2 that you primarily had interactions with Officer Tao, right?
Yes.
And you testified that Officer Chauvin didn't say very much, right?
Yes.
But it's also fair to say that you couldn't necessarily hear whether those other officers were speaking to Mr. Chauvin.
Objection, Your Honor, is assuming facts that are not established.
Overruled. You can answer if you know. You want me to ask the question again?
I heard him.
Okay.
No, I did not hear the other officers.
Right. And it's also fair to say that when you first started recording, you were one of the few people that were there, right?
I was the first person to record.
Right.
First person, yeah, sure.
And by the end of the video, there were more people present.
Yes,
And would you agree that initially when you started recording, you weren't saying much, if anything, to the officers, right?
I don't remember.
But as time went on and more people showed up, voices became louder. Would you agree with that?
As we understood more what was happening.
I just want to know.
What we seen
Right,
is how we reacted.
right.
Like you said, the video speaks for itself.
Understood, and I appreciate that. So you heard various people calling the officers names, right?
Yes,
And the volume of the people in that were bystanders grew louder over time. Would you agree with that?
yes. More so as he was becoming more unresponsive.
And more people also started speaking at the same time, right?
Yes,
So we had, you said there were 12 to 14 people
around that.
around that number. I think I counted 12 in the picture.
Okay.
And several of them were speaking. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
And several of them were yelling.
yes,
And they were becoming more and more upset based upon what they saw.
correct.
Do you remember Officer Tao saying to you, if you can breathe if you can talk?
Yes,
Now, in addition to your initial interview with law enforcement officers, you've also met with the prosecution team a couple of times in preparation for trial, right?
who would that be?
Well, like Mr. Ellison, Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Frank, Mr. Slisher, and a host of others, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you were you grew up in the nearby neighborhood, right?
I'm from here. I grew up near the suburbs.
Okay. But you were at the time living
At the time, I've been there for years. Yes, correct.
for how many years, did you say?
Maybe, I don't know, 5+.
Okay. And you attended Roosevelt High School at the time?
Yes,
And you testified that you felt safe, walking to the store.
actually, sorry. At the time of this, I'm not sure if I attended Roosevelt because I was in the process of switching schools.
Okay. I think it was during the pandemic, right? And so everybody kind of had, all of a sudden you had to study from home kind of a thing, right?
I was already at my other school,
Okay.
so yes,
You testified that you've walked to Cup Foods hundreds, if not thousands of times,
correct.
and that you felt safe doing so.
Any time of the night, I would walk there.
Okay. Would you agree that you had previously told members of the prosecution team that at night the neighborhood can be a little bit more dangerous?
Some nights, I mean, wasn't really known for violence like every night or a lot, but I feel like any area has some type of crime
Sure.
from here and there.
Sure, understood. And I'm not trying to disparage the neighborhood, right? I'm just asking what you had told the prosecution before,
Right.
all right? You ultimately ended up posting your video to social media, right?
Correct.
And it went viral,
Correct.
and was that a surprise to you?
Definitely.
Changed your life, right?
Your Honor, object is beyond the scope of the record, bro.
Overruled.
Are you asking me?
Yes, it changed your life.
It has.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Blackwell?
Darnella, you had just been asked questions about the safety of your neighborhood at night. On May 25th, when you were you there at Cup Foods at night?
No.
Sun was out, you could see fine.
Correct.
You were also asked whether or not you were aware of what people were across the street from where the officers were, what people were on the other side of 38th Street. Remember Mr. Nelson asking you about that?
Correct.
Did you see anybody from across the street or from 38th Street do anything to either attack or threaten Mr. Chauvin?
No.
And do you think if somebody came across the street to attack or threaten Mr. Chauvin, you had your camera going, you'd have recorded it?
Correct.
Now he asked some questions about, again, the bystanders who were there, and he talked with you about that, those bystanders. Did you see a single thing that indicated to you that Mr. Chauvin was afraid of you, your little cousin, or a single one of the bystanders?
No.
You were asked about cars on the street. There are cars and cars and cars going. Did you notice, was Mr. Chauvin trying to get out of the way of cars?
No.
You were also asked about what the officers might have been saying to Mr. Chauvin.
Correct.
Remember talking about that?
Yes.
Did you hear any of the officers tell Mr. Chauvin that Mr. Floyd didn't have a pulse? Did you hear him say that even?
No.
You didn't hear him say anything.
No.
And you were also asked questions about how, as the events went on May 25th, how you and others may have gotten louder.
Correct.
Darnell, are you the sort of person who, in response to seeing somebody being potentially harmed on the street, gets louder?
I'm more of I bottle things up. I feel things inside. I have social anxiety, so it's really out of my comfort zone to really be that out person. But, when I seen what I saw, at moments I was loud.
Loud in response to what you saw.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Nelson asked you a few questions about your video going viral and how that's changed your life. Remember that at the end?
Yes.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen how your viewing, experiencing what happened to George Floyd has affected your life?
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father, I have a black brother, I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done. He
Thank
should
you,
have.
Donna.
That'll finish the answer, thank you.
Okay.
Did you finish your answer, Donnell?
She finished her answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Proceed to your next question.
No, Your Honor, that's my last question. Thank you, Donnell.
Mr. Nelson. All right, thank you. You may step down. You can leave, thank you. next witness for the state is coming? All right. And Mr. Blackwell, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Judea.
Good morning.
First of all, would you tell us how old you are?
9,
How old will you be by the end of next week?
10,
And you got a 10th birthday coming up.
yes.
What grade are you in?
3rd,
Do you have a cousin named Darnella?
yes.
Do you remember going with her sometime last year in May?
Yeah,
You have to let me finish my question, but do you remember going with her to Cup Foods?
yes,
And you like going to Cup Foods to buy snacks.
yes,
Did you go with your cousin Darnella sometime in May of last year to get snacks?
yeah.
Let me show you what's Exhibit 14. No? Well, just a second. Okay, I'm showing you what's been marked as our exhibit number 13 and asking, can you see the two people
Yes,
in the front of that picture? Can you?
yeah.
Who are those people?
Me and my cousin.
And which one is you? All right. So the little one with the word love on her shirt.
Yes,
Now you that day you went into Cup Foods to get your snacks,
yeah.
and when you came out of the Cup Foods, do you remember what you did next when you came out?
I saw Officer put a knee on the neck on George Floyd.
Okay, now you mentioned someone named George Floyd.
Yes.
Did you know George Floyd before May 25th?
I can't hear it.
Could you say that again? You can't hear?
No.
Okay. Had you ever met George Floyd before
No.
going into Cup Foods that day?
No.
As far as you know, had you ever seen it?
No.
Now, when you came out to where your cousin was and you saw George Floyd, was there a policeman there?
Yes.
Do you remember what the policeman or policemen were doing?
Putting a knee on the neck with George Floyd.
If I showed you a picture of a policeman, why don't I just do that? Exhibit 17. Let me ask you if you recognize the policeman in what's marked as Exhibit 17. Do you recognize this man?
Yes.
Who is he?
I can't remember his name.
Okay. Do you remember what he was doing? How do you know him?
He was putting a knee on the neck with George Floyd.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
No.
Okay. How about him?
Yes.
All right. So is that the person then you saw?
Yes.
So you saw a knee being put on the neck of George Floyd. When was the knee taken? Did you see that the knee was ever taken off of George Floyd's neck?
No.
Were you there when an ambulance came?
Yes.
Tell us what happened after you saw the ambulance come.
Yes. The ambulance had to push him.
And how did that happen? Did they simply come in an ambulance and then go up to push him off, or what happened?
They asked him nicely to get off of him.
And when they asked him nicely to get off of him, what did he do?
He still stayed on him.
And then what happened after he still stayed on him? What did the ambulance people do?
They just had to put him off, get off him.
Are you able to tell us, having been there on this day and seeing the officer on top of George Floyd, how did you feel about that? How did it affect you?
I was sad and kind of mad.
And tell us, why were you sad and mad?
Because it felt like he was stopping his breathing, and it's kind of like hurting him.
Thank you, Judea. I want to ask you any other questions.
Mr. Nelson?
I have no questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Judea, you can go. You are excused, so you're done
Put your
testifying.
mask on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your Honor, I believe this would be a good time for a lunch break.
All right. Members of the jury, lunches might not be here until 12:30, but let's shoot for 1:15 to reconvene. So we are in recess until 1:15. Thank you.